want to welcome everyone to the Prep Residency webinar. Today we'll be discussing the Prep Residency pre-service program as a component of the Prep allotment. Before I get started today, my name is Melissa Yoder. I am the Division Director of Educator of Quality Preparation, and Dr. Sherilyn Moody is our Director of Apprenticeship. TEA Teacher Residency at tea.texas.gov is our standing email address if should you have additional questions during the application period, et cetera, regarding the residency program allotment. For the sake of today, we will be monitoring the chat for questions and providing support there. Please submit any questions to the FAQ or the Q&A icon on the chat features, and we'll be gathering those responses and providing a formal response at a near-term date. Today's agenda is as follows. We're going to begin with an overview of the LASO Cycle 4 application process and timeline, and then we're going to spend the majority of the time talking about the Prep Residency pre-service program, and then we'll wrap with a few next steps for you today. Again, submit those questions during the webinar using the Zoom Q&A feature. And then as a note, the webinar slides and recordings will be posted on the LASO 4 Cycle website after all webinars are completed. And you may email laso@tea.texas.gov with any follow-up questions. All right, so I'll begin with a brief overview of LASO Cycle 4. Just as a quick overview here, the Learning Acceleration Support Opportunities, LASO, is a single consolidated application that combines grants and now allotments and in-kind supports centered around key strategies that accelerate academic learning gains. LASO Cycle 4, as you can see here, will offer 15 opportunities focused on curriculum and instruction, educator training, and more, and innovative school models. It funds an estimated $500 million in services and supports, all in one application to access that funding. So we are very excited to include this prep allotment application within the context of LASO, hopefully supporting and facilitating ease of use for our districts. LASO Cycle 4 is anchored in 4 learning acceleration strategies that you can see here. We're also focused on the talent pipeline and how to support our teachers. Just wanted to step back for a second here. If you attended our prep overview session for the entire allotment, I know my colleague Allison Friedlander spoke to the fact that today's presentation is pertaining to the LASO Prep program allotment component, the residency program, and all school systems are selected for funding that meet eligibility criteria and commit to the statutorily based requirements that we'll review today. This is not a grant. School systems are selected for grants for funding based on a set of priority points. This is an entitlement. If the school system meets eligibility requirements and commits to those statutorily based requirements, they will be approved and selected for this allotment. It's very small print here, but this is just an overview snapshot of the LASO 4 portfolio. You can see here underneath the education and training component, we have the prep program allotment listed, and it is an annual allotment. And then we also have the Texas Strategic Staffing for Residencies grant, which we'll speak to a little bit today, which is a supporting grant that may support allotment applicants. Again, all eligible districts may receive the allotment when they apply. Great. And with that overview, we are going to step into the prep residency pre-service deep dive. The first piece here, I'm going to just provide a very, very brief background about some data and some rationale for the prep residency pre-service program. So as you know, different preparation routes lead to different outcomes for teachers and students. This data here shows and demonstrates that higher quality preparation routes improve teacher retention rates over time. So you can see here that candidates prepared in a traditional undergraduate route have a higher likelihood of still being in the Texas workforce 5 years out versus other routes you see here. We also know that the quality and also pertaining to the importance in the quality of preparation, and that the route of preparation does matter. When it comes to residencies in particular, a recent study of paid teacher residencies in Texas shows that teacher residencies have had a positive impact on both student achievement and teacher retention. So you can see here that first-year teachers who were paid as residents during their clinical experience were as effective in their first year as as a fifth year teacher in reading. And then we also saw similar strong outcomes when it came to retention of first-year teachers who served in those paid clinical residencies. And if outcomes were to continue in that fashion, there would be approximately 3,600 fewer first-year teachers leaving the profession between 22-23 and 23-24. And then you can see in this bar chart on the left that the first-year teachers who completed that paid residency also performed comparatively to other first-year teachers in math, but were much more effective in reading per that first note. So residencies are already showing, though newer in our state, that progress and that traction towards student outcomes and retention. So with that, we know that higher quality pathways matter, and it matters for student outcomes and retention. But the current state indicates that most teacher candidates entering the classroom as new teachers who are new to teaching are entering without any significant training before they begin teaching. Last year, our percent of new teachers hired who were new to teaching was indicated that 55% were uncertified, meaning the majority of new teacher hires were uncertified. And again, these are teachers who are new to the teaching profession. During this time period, we also learned that student achievement results statewide had stagnated, despite other significant positive reforms and interventions and supports. So again, it reinforced the importance of quality preparation. If you joined us for our prep overview webinar, I know my colleague Allison Friedlander spoke to the work of our the governor's established teacher vacancy task force that was put together in 2022 and led by one of our colleagues, Kyla Jaramillo. And in that teacher vacancy task force, the task force recommended 3 core areas with sets of strategies. And that included a specific focus on improving the pipeline and pre-service preparation to address our current teacher retention challenges. So you can see here highlighted on the screen, this 4th indicator around improving the pipeline and pre-service preparation for teachers being one of those core supports. So as a result, HB2 establishes not only the prep allotment with this pre-service residency program, but it formally codifies a teacher residency route. And currently, our State Board for Educator Certification has a teacher residency route, but now it is statutorily established. So that is a huge, huge deal. And this legislation also provides funding to sustain and scale those teacher residencies. So huge celebration here. So you can see here this letter B that highlights the establishment and the funding of a teacher residency pathway and the expansion of educator preparation program capacity to produce teacher residents through technical assistance was one of those recommendations. So we're pleased to announce that through the work of the SBEC previously and through this new statute, this objective is well underway. And with that, I'm going to take us into the prep residency pre-service program. Just for background context here, we know the prep program allotment includes 5 programs aimed at strengthening the teacher talent pipeline. And in doing so, the goal of this allotment is to support districts to address recruitment, preparation, and that ongoing mentorship and support of aspiring teachers, teacher candidates, and novice teachers as one big coherent strategy versus perhaps trying to address these components with limited resources as separate things. So today's discussion, of course, will center on the prep pre-service residency program, but wanted to reframe everything and make it very clear that there are 5 programs and these programs are meant to work together. Today, when we look at the prep residency program, one thing I wanted to just reestablish is the importance of quality preparation and that it is linked to those stronger outcomes for students and teachers. This is the whole goal of establishing these pre-service programs. We know that teacher preparation has some key practices, including classroom practice, content knowledge development in our teacher candidates, and then the mentoring and coaching that occurs, of course, within their preparation, but also 1 to 2 years out. So the prep partnership programs as a whole enable these components in terms of the teacher's preparation. And moving into our discussion today, we'll be taking a look at some of those program requirements for the prep residency program that highlight these key factors that you see here on the screen. Before we dive into the prep residency program, I also wanted to just note briefly that in order to implement the prep allotment, the State Board for Educator Certification will establish new route requirements for the 3 prep funded routes that support those 3 prep funded programs for residency, traditional, and the pre-service alternative certification. Educator preparation programs must be approved for those routes to serve as partners to districts in those partnership programs. Other non-funded routes, of course, will still remain, as you can see here in this visual. But again, there will be 3 educator preparation routes for residency, traditional, and pre-service alternative certification that will be funded, and the SBEC will go through the process to develop those route requirements for the implementation of those routes and for educator preparation programs to be approved for that participation. As noted on a previous webinar, due to rulemaking and approval timelines, the prep pre-service programs will phase in over 2 years, but the good news is statutory provisions exist to implement the residency program in 2026, 2027. So you can see here that Tech 21.904E allows for a residency partnership program to begin prior to implementation of the additional requirements, including content training requirements, which we'll take a look at in a second, which allows for that earlier launch. So really glad that does exist, allowing us to get this off the ground. ahead of the further rulemaking that must take place to establish those routes. And then you can see here that in 27, 28, the other programs will launch once those rules and approvals have taken place. Alrighty, and with that, we're going to dive into the PrEP Residency Program Partnership, which again will begin funding participating programs in 2026, 2027. Just stepping back, big picture first, I wanted to highlight the requirements of the program that are focused on supporting teacher candidates to receive a high quality year-long teacher residency experience. Those are centralized in these three big buckets and then result in success-based funding. So for the residency pre-service program, the teacher resident must be prepared in a practice-based preparation setting within a year-long residency program. We're going to click into some of those components in just a second, but high level, that resident will be supervised under an effective cooperating teacher for an entire school year prior to becoming the teacher of record. For sake of naming conventions today, statute names it is a cooperating teacher, but we will reference this cooperating teacher as the host teacher that is currently named in the residency route as well. The teacher residency route that is currently approved by the SBEC. So rest assured, your host teachers are still the appropriate cooperating teacher for your teacher residents. The second component here is the requirement for candidates to be prepared through by their educator preparation program with state developed content, including the statutorily required reading and math academies for specific certification areas, as well as other designated content as determined by the Commissioner of Education. We'll be providing more information about these requirements in communications to come. And remember, this is not a requirement for the 26-27 school year. The only requirement there pertaining is that the partnership exists between a district and an educator preparation program who has already been approved to offer the SBEC teacher residency route. So we will go deeper into that as well. The third piece here is the requirement within the program for the district and the educator preparation program or programs to establish a formal partnership with a written agreement. The school system and the EPP will be responsible for establishing this agreement, ensuring that they agree to all requirements of the program, and that they understand and commit to the requirements outlined in the Commissioner of Education rule that will be to come. And truly, the establishment of this formal partnership ensures that the candidate's preparation that is taking place supports the candidate to meet the local needs of the school system, aligning to that school system's vision for instruction, etc. And the final component here, which we're going to talk about at length, so I won't belabor at this time, is the success and needs-based funding pertaining to the residency pre-service program. We're going to walk through how money will flow directly to the educator preparation program and directly to the district in just a few moments. So I will hold off on providing additional detail, but there will be funds that are allocated at the onset of the candidate beginning in the program, and funds that will be allocated when the candidate reaches certain milestones along their preparation journey and employment journey. So we will dig deeply into those requirements momentarily. Going back up though to that first area around the practice-based preparation in a year-long residency, few things that are really important. I'm going to walk through each of these. And these pieces, for those of you on the call today who are already implementing your residency programs, will look very, very familiar, as these are coming directly from those requirements that are currently in the SBEC's residency, teacher residency route requirements. So the first piece here is that the candidate must be placed in an in-person pre-K-12 setting in a classroom under the supervision of that cooperating host teacher who meets the qualifications described in our State Board for Educator Certification requirements in Chapter 228, and is trained to mentor and support the resident. There are requirements already in place for training and qualifications of the host teacher in the SBEC approved route. The next set of pieces here pertain to the span and length of the residency preparation experience. The residency experience must span the full academic year, and that does include the first and last instructional day. And it will total 750 hours when it comes to that clinical experience, with a minimum of 21 hours per week, which still provides for some flexibility if that candidate is supporting the district in other manner, or that campus in other manners, through a strategic staffing model. So this, again, these requirements do not differ in any way from what is currently in the SBEC approved teacher residency route. The resident is also required to be hired as an at-will employee in the school system. So school systems will have, some latitude in, how the pay, how those candidates are paid and the pay is structured, but they should be hired as an at-will employee in the school system. There is now a code within our set of PEAMS identifiers to identify a teacher resident as well. Residency candidates must also engage in co-teaching and lead instruction for a minimum of 400 hours within that 750 hours that is totally required. During this time, within that co-teaching model, the district and the EPP partner will make sure that that candidate has that gradual release of responsibility within the co-teaching model, scaling up their skills so that they can be positioned to engage in that lead instruction. And that is our last piece here on the slide. And the final piece I will note that is part of the evaluation of the candidate's readiness, the educator preparation program that has been approved to offer the route has been approved because they have submitted evidence that their candidates engage in structured performance benchmarks, showing that the candidate can demonstrate efficacy towards those certain competencies during the progression of their preparation. So there's a set of performance gates the candidate must complete as they progress through their preparation. And again, if a program has been approved, they have already submitted evidence of those structures. And it's just a matter at that point of making sure that the candidate actually attains those milestones. Just as an FYI to folks on this call today, we have a QR code here on the right, but this is the link to our Texas Teacher Residency's website, and you may grab that QR code to see the list of SBEC approved EPPs in our state. Great. I'm going to move into that second bullet from that, or the third bullet from that that overarching master list of the requirements for the prep partnership program. And this is pertaining to just the overall requirements for engaging in the prep partnership program. So in order to engage in the partnership program, there must be an eligible school system and an EPP with an SBEC approved Texas Teacher Residency Preparation route. So those are the two big things there. For that residency pre-service partnership, they will have to have an established written agreement between the partners that really clarifies individual roles, practices for shared governance, where the partnership will review candidate data um, and make sure that the program meets the needs of those candidates. And then this leads to mutual accountability across the district and the EPP for the development of those candidates. Again, these practices should be captured in the written agreement. And I will note this again in a latter section, but we will be providing example written agreements as well as some templates that you may use shortly as you are building these formalized agreements to support your implementation of the prep residency pre-service partnership program. The other piece here, as I just kind of walked through some of those teacher preparation requirements, that candidates must meet all requirements already in Texas Administrative Code for teacher residency preparation for the route that currently exists. And they must meet all future requirements for the prep allotment that are forthcoming through Commissioner of Education rulemaking processes. And then we will talk about this shortly, but there will be a future requirement for cooperating host teachers to complete the Texas mentorship training, and I'll provide more details on that in an upcoming section of this presentation. All right, now for the fun part, getting into that success and needs-based funding. So I'm going to take us on a journey through how the funding will flow throughout the allotment and throughout the candidate's progression through key milestones to attain that success and needs-based funding. Alrighty, and so taking a look at the funding snapshot, if you all joined me for the prep pre-service overall overview session, we had everything compressed to one slide, and it was a lot to take in. So we're going to go a little bit slower this time and walk through all of the components. So here's our funding snapshot for the prep residency pre-service partnership. Ultimately, candidates can generate, each resident may generate between $24,000 to $39,500. Annually, a district may apply for up to 40 residents to generate somewhere between that set of values. And so we're going to walk through the first funding stream, which is the initial funding stream. And this is in the amount of $12,000, and it will flow through the foundational schools program directly to the school system based on annual projections. We'll be able to provide more information about how those projections are generated and how you're going to apply for those projections shortly. But each candidate will generate that $12,000 in that initial funding. And so within that set of initial funding, $10,000 of those funds are required to be used to support the resident's minimum pay. So $10,000 will come from the allotment. The district will also be responsible for at least a $10,000 match to that $10,000 to achieve that $20,000 minimum pay salary for the resident. The district may source that from local funds or in latter years, once generated, from the success-based funding. The remaining $2,000 are required to be used for the stipend for the cooperating host teacher. And so the resident enters their residency program, they complete all requirements, and they achieve their enhanced standards certificate. At this point, the district would be eligible to receive for that candidate up to $16,000. Again, this funding will flow from the Foundational School Program Fund directly to the district when they complete that residency and earn that enhanced standard certificate. This funding is discretionary and should be spent on the program implementation. This still, however, provides for districts to make decisions about how do I spend these funds. I might put them towards candidate tuition support. I might use them to fund a staff member who is overseeing and managing my talent pipeline strategy. For example, those are two examples of how the funds could be used. I could use those discretionary funds to support my match for candidates. Again, there's a lot of opportunity here so long as it is supporting program implementation. Within those funds, we're going to take a look at how those might break down. So within that success-based funding for those candidates that have completed those requirements, each candidate who completes their requirement of completing the residency and attaining their enhanced standard certification will generate $2,000 minimally. If they generate more, it will depend on a couple factors. One, if the campus where that candidate is placed has a high needs rural factor, they can generate $3,000 times that factor. We'll be able to provide more information about how those numbers are generated and provide for districts what those unique high needs rural factors are for each campus where the resident may be placed. But for sake of clarity here, it is a value from 0 to 4 by which we'll be able to multiply that $3,000 sum. And then if the candidate is also getting certified in special education or bilingual, they can accrue an additional $2,000. So that is the summary of the district funding. An additional set of funding will flow through FSP to the educator preparation program with a $10,000 base. So for each candidate who completes their enhanced standard certificate requirements and completes their first year of teaching in a Texas school system, they will generate at least $10,000 that will flow directly to the educator preparation program. If the candidate has also been required to complete and has completed the reading and math academies, that candidate will generate an additional $1.5 thousand, so up to $11.5 thousand. Funding flowing to the educator preparation program, again, has some discretionary use, but it should be used for things such as offsetting tuition, fees for the candidates, certification exam fees, for example, et cetera, and administrative costs for the program, like particularly as they're considering how will I ensure that I have a high quality program. I may need to scale up supports for my candidates as I'm developing a strong model that will support strong preparation. One statutory requirement I think I should call out here as well is that the IHE must allocate at least 85% of the funds to the educator preparation program. So that's a lot of information. So I thought it would be helpful for us to take a look through a couple funding examples. I'm going to monitor the time here, and if we're running a little behind, I may speed us through the second one. But in the first example, we have 5 residents who are placed at an elementary campus, and one of those residents, for example, is preparing to become certified in special education. The campus has been designated with a 2 for their high needs rural factor. And in this scenario, all of the residents complete the residency, they obtain their enhanced standard certificate, and they complete their first year of teaching. So the success-based funding is going to flow to the district and subsequently to the EBP. So here you can see laid out the calculations for the initial funding, the success-based funding for the LEA, and the success-based funding for the EPP. The initial funding is pretty simple with that sum of $12,000 per resident. When we look at the success-based funding, we see that every single candidate generates that $2,000. And because they're all placed on that same campus with that factor of 2 for the rural high needs, they're all generating the same amount for that high needs rural factor. And then we have that one special education candidate who is generating that additional $2,000, totaling $42,000 for success-based funding. And then finally, you can see here for the EPP, again, each of those candidates having completed all of those milestones for success-based funding generate the $10,000 base. And then all of those candidates also completed the reading and math academies. So we can see here that the total is $159,500 generated by those 5 candidates. The funding example B is a little more complex, with only 8 out of 10 residents out of the 10 total successfully completing the residency and earning that enhanced standard certificate. And 8 of those folks successfully completed their first year of teaching. I'll give you all a second to take a look at the math for this particular example as well, taking a look at that initial funding, that success-based funding for the LEA, and the success-based funding for the EPP. And they were placed at a high school campus and did not generate that reading and math academies set of funding. Alrighty. These examples, of course, will be shared in the deck to lean back on as you're thinking and planning through the process. So we talked about what we generated for the 40 residents that each district who is eligible for the allotment may apply to fund. There is a provision in statute that also enables a school system to qualify for an additional 40 residents at the traditional candidate funding level. So here you can see marked in yellow, we have these additional 40 candidates per year that would be funded at the traditional level. So if I'm a district and I want to fund 80 residents, I'll fund 40 at the previous rate we walked through, and then I will fund an additional 40. I could fund an additional 40 at a lesser rate. The thing to keep in mind here is that the initial funding would be $4,000, with $3,000 attributing to the candidate and $1,000 attributing to that cooperating teacher. However, the minimum salary requirements for those individuals would not change. So the school system would be responsible for sourcing additional match funding, which again could come from a previous year's success-based funding. The other thing to note here as well is the success-based funding that would be generated for those residents to the school system and to the EPP would be less than the funds generated by the first 40 candidates that were being funded at the rate of the residency rate of allotment funding generation. And so here, to summarize, you can see the example has 40 fully funded residents, 40 funded at the traditional rate, with 80 total that could be funded. One thing to note, and we'll be providing further guidance as folks are identifying candidates in the spring for funding, that the partnership would have to determine which residents would qualify for the prep traditional rate versus the fully funded rate. Alrighty, so that is the funding snapshot. Really important though to take the time to walk through that. We're going to step into eligibility for the allotment. The prep program allotment, again, is a non-competitive entitlement. And that means that all applicants who meet the eligibility criteria and commit to the program requirements will be funded. All who apply through the PrEP allotment application process. So in the review of applications, the review team will be looking for these components, meeting the eligibility requirement and committing to the requirements for the program. When it comes to school system eligibility, all districts and charters as defined on this slide here are eligible to apply for each of the PrEP programs. Again, these are some broader pieces of information I know we have shared in the previous allotment overview. But for the purpose of this program, you can see here that a charter school is defined as follows on this slide. So for charter applicants, these are the criteria to be able to apply. When it comes to Senate Bill 1882 operating partners, a couple of key components I would review one more time. Here are as follows. When it comes to funding, 1882 operating partners are still subjected to the statutorily based funding caps described in each of the PrEP program's guidelines. So what we just walked through with the residency funding caps would apply to an 1882 operating partner. When it comes to applications, the operating partner will receive unique links to their application. So we have a separate system with application system link and or could request the application link through the form linked in this deck. So you'll have access to this deck to make that request as well. And then when it comes to written agreements, since the FSP funding will flow as it is structured to the partner district, the operating partner must have a written agreement with the partner district that they are working within to document how the allotment funds will generated through the partnership will be spent. So you would need to, as an operating partner, need to work with the district to whom the funds would flow. And then the final thing I would note here for adult charter schools, adult charter schools are ineligible to participate in the PrEP pre-service residency program and PrEP Grow Your Own programs. So this is because statutory requirement in Tech 21.902 requires that the pre-service programs place teacher candidates in pre-kindergarten through grade 12 classrooms. So just wanted to flag that here on this webinar that those adult charters will not be eligible for participation. We're going to walk through now the assurances. All right, so for the residency program, applicants must review relevant sections of the education code below aligned to their programs of interest. So we've listed here the key components in Texas Education Code, which includes the definitions for PrEP, the overarching PrEP pre-service overview section, and the PrEP residency program section, as well as the standards and performance goals. And then 48.157 is the description of PrEP program allotment funding. As a note here, currently Commissioner of Education rule is under development and will be posted for public comment shortly. It will be effective prior to the 26-27 school year. We'll share more specific dates related to rulemaking in the coming months, but adherence to those rules will be noted in partnership agreements upon accepting the allotment as well. You can see here are another set of assurances that all of these components are also in the program guidelines and application materials. But the district, school system, and EPP representatives must appoint a school system and EPP representative to engage in all required prep allotment and prep pre-service residency communications. So there has to be a point person. They will also ensure that the host teacher completes the Texas mentorship residency training as the agency adopted mentorship training. And we have a caveat here that districts will be able to train those individuals, are encouraged, they're highly encouraged to train those individuals ahead of the 26-27 school year, but will be required to do so ahead of the 27-28 school year. So I will talk about that in just a moment in further detail. And the final piece here is having a written agreement with an educator preparation program for the prep residency pre-service program implementation by the 26-27 school year. These are all pieces we'll take another look at in just a moment. I'm going to run through this rather briefly to make sure that we finish on time today. To calculate the allotment and monitor the prep program implementation, TEA is going to require that programs submit a set of data, essentially, to make sure that we can provide the appropriate funding and make sure that programs are meeting minimum requirements. Those components are as follows. The district will be required to submit identification information of prep program partnership participants, so the residents in ECOS. They'll also have to submit campus placements for those residents in ECOS. Recall back to the section around the funding considerations. To determine those rural and high needs factors, we will need to know the campus placement for those individuals. They'll also have to report spending for the prep allotment, and we'll be providing more information around spending reporting shortly. And then ensure that the program participants, including those residents, complete any annual program perception surveys administered by TEA. Again, these last two areas we'll be providing more information on, as well as the process by which you will identify those participants, as well as indicating those campus placements. When it comes to that written partnership agreement, I think I've talked through most of these components, but the district will be required to submit those agreements to the TEA by the dates requested. So we'll be requesting those submissions in the spring. We'll also provide guidance and examples, as I previously noted. But the written partnership agreement must articulate the following things. They must describe how the partnership will implement all requirements in statute, as well as the proposed program requirements that will be in the forthcoming Commissioner of Education rules. So given the rulemaking timelines, we are not asking for submission of these written partnership agreements right now, and we'll be asking for those in the spring. And again, support is well underway. Here you can see a set of time commitment suggestions related to the implementation of this program. I think the main thing here is there must be campus supervision and administrative support to work with the educator preparation program in those in those governance sessions, and making sure that there is clear assignment of those candidates to a cooperating teacher. And then additionally, for the host teacher, there is of course, the responsibility of co-teaching in that year-long residency experience that also includes feedback cycles and support for that teacher candidate. When it comes to the application, again, it is an entitlement, and all applicants who meet the requirements and agree to the assurances will be funded as described in the formula funding in TEC 48.157. And now I'm going to briefly take us into, before we close out, opportunities for related training and support. So you can see here, there are two key trainings and supports that we're going to speak to that support to implement the prep residency pre-service program. The first component we're going to take a look at is the Texas Strategic Staffing Training. This training has been led by our education service centers for the past, 4 years now. And it has supported partnerships to design and implement a paid teacher residency program that is able to be sustainably funded through reallocating district resources. And upon reallocation, those teacher residents take on additional instructional responsibilities while completing a teacher residency program. For example, as a district, I may say that on one day a week, my teacher resident is going to support as a substitute teacher. 3 days a week, they are engaging in that sheltered co-teaching practice with their mentor teacher. And when I do this, I'm able to reallocate that funding from the substitute teacher funds to support a stipend for that teacher candidate. I'm also probably thinking about other ways to reinvest funds from other buckets of money that can support that pay as well. The Texas Mentorship Training is a high quality training that seeks to ensure that every beginning teacher receives the guidance and support needed to thrive, lead, and increase their overall teacher, that would lead to increased teacher effectiveness, retention, and impact on student success. So pairing these two supports together, support for enabling funding for those teacher residents, and then support for their providing a strong training that can be applied to the candidate to support for that teacher candidate's mentor, host teacher while they're being prepared, but also to the candidate, to the candidate's mentor in the first and second year once they leave once they have left their program and they're beginning as a teacher is really important. One thing to note here, a statutory requirement for all teacher residents who remain in their district where they're prepared is that they will receive training from a mentor prepared in the Texas Mentorship Training in the first and second year outside of their once they become a teacher in a classroom. So these supports and systems are here to help and support those new teachers. We're going to take a peek briefly at the Texas Strategic Staffing Support Grant that can support the implementation scale of the prep residency pre-service program. So as noted previously, our LASO prep program allotment is an entitlement, and all eligible applicants that meet the criteria and commit to those requirements will be funded. Within the LASO grants, we have a Texas Strategic Staffing Grant, and we aim to award 50 applicants to receive these supports. And the idea here is that this strategic staffing service, and I just highlighted an example of how that might look and work on a campus to support reallocation and reinvestment of funds to support that paid teacher residency stipend, can be used in a few manners. One, to support districts who are seeking to scale beyond the 40 residents. So I'm looking to scale further supports for my pool of teacher residents. How am I going to pay them? And it can also just support, even if I have a small number of residents I'm trying to support with reallocated funds for, help me to think about how do I provide that match? How can I structure that match funding for my teacher candidates? So we'll take a look at a couple examples here, which I think is helpful. Here's a scenario where a school system hits that cap of 40 residents and they have 5 additional residents they want to pay. And they're going to use that additional piece of statute where they can generate funds from the that match the level of the funding for the traditional candidate. So they've got a lot of work to do to make up for some additional match funding for that $20,000 salary for the candidate. So in this scenario, the strategic staffing support could help the district to think through, one, like, what are my additional supports to create the match, to fund the match for all of these candidates? But I'm really going to have to focus on sourcing funds for the match for those 5 additional candidates. In our second example, this is an example with 14 teacher residents. And this district is simply looking to reallocate funds to meet that $20,000 threshold minimum pay requirement for those candidates. So one thing that could be considered here is this different sources of funds that could be used to reallocate and reinvest to support that $20,000 yearly salary. All right, y'all, I have 3 minutes, so I'm going to move us along. The Texas Mentorship Training is the second support service I mentioned at the top of the training today. As you can see here, it's required for the prep pre-service residency and mentorship programs. For the 26-27 school year, it is highly encouraged to train and prepare those host teachers through this service. And we're going to walk through like some of those, how to register for that and those details in a moment. There's a few reasons for this, right? One, prep mentorship program mentors will be trained in this, and that creates some continuity in how we are training all those supporting individuals for our teacher candidates and novice teachers. Two, this has been a long-standing challenge. We've heard from the field about the bandwidth and capacity to provide training to those host teachers across the educator preparation program and the district partner. And so this provides for a low-cost solution to that long-standing challenge. Again, this training aligns to policy requirements, but it also aligns to other district infrastructure that a district may be engaging in, such as the LIFT, Leadership and Instructional Foundations for Texas program for strong curriculum implementation and coaching. And it is delivered by certified Texas mentorship training providers across Texas at your regional service centers. The training supports all mentoring educator roles, including in that the cooperating and host teachers. So you can see here, there are 2 pathways, one for mentoring educators and one for district and campus leaders, and to support coherence across campus implementation. All right. This slide just provides a brief overview of the topics covered in the training. And this is an example of what that training looks like over the course of the year. So you can see there's an initial training of about 12 hours centering on those key topics. And then there are reinforcing trainings throughout the fall, winter, and spring to support that cooperating teacher and or mentor teacher. And then you can see the through line here that the district and campus leaders provide ongoing mentoring, coaching, and support. So again, highly encourage those host teachers to engage in this training for the 26-27 school year, but it will be required for the 27-28 school year. Here's our regional service centers. All 20 offer the service, as well as several other providers. And you can register at the TMT website and reach out to the training provider to sign up. Alrighty, so to wrap things up here today, here's our favorite slide with all of the opportunities for the allotment webinars that are either recorded and posted or forthcoming. We have a second residency webinar coming up next week, as well as our GYO webinars. And then today at 12:30, we have our Texas Strategic Staffing webinar that will also be rehosted on the 23rd. Key idea here, since the program allotment is not a grant, there are some differences in the steps and timelines after the application submission for awarding, verifying, and funding participation. I am just going to show you here some key dates and times related to this application process. So you can see we are here in the application window in October, and we are in one of the program webinars right now. Office hours are pending shortly, coming down the line. Prep program applications will be reviewed December 12th through January 22nd, and announcements should be anticipated for early February. There's no negotiation or notice. It's an allotment, not a grant. And there's no e-grants process for this allotment. In April and May, we'll be conducting program verification of participation and that submission of those written agreements that I referenced earlier. And we'll be providing that information to approved partnerships once approved in the spring. Great. And we have discussed the verification. And one final reminder here, LEAs must submit the LASO Cycle 4 applications by December 3rd at 5 p.m. Central Time. And again, here's a few quick reminders around unique links, requests for unique links. The PDF of the application is also posted on the LASO Cycle 4 website for folks who have been asking for how to preview that. And then finally, remember that the application must be signed off by the superintendent or 1882 operating partner official to be accepted. And again, as a reminder, the To the Administrator address for the program allotment is currently posted to the TAA webpage. So it just has some overarching key information around this process and links to the LASO site. Alrighty, so with that, if you have more questions, want to just talk to someone, this is a lot of information. On October 27th from 10 to 10:30, there will be an office hours, and there will also be an application support office hours on October 27th and November 3rd. We'll be updating and posting those FAQs shortly. And in the meantime, any questions about the application process or technical assistance with the application, you may contact LASO. And then for questions about the program, please contact that TA teacher residency at tea.gov, at tea.texas.gov web address. Alrighty, and then as a reminder, all LASO resources can be found on the LASO website. So here's just a summary of those key dates, next steps, and available LASO resources. And with that, we thank you for attending today's webinar. We will now stop recording, and we will hang out for a couple extra minutes